What are controls and what are requirements? Do you know the difference between them? The main point of this module is to define requirements and controls and determine how the two are linked together. Join us in this video to learn more about requirements and controls. This module covers RMF, requirements and controls. Security and privacy requirements are an important factor to consider in the RMF. It's important to understand the concept of security and privacy requirements and the relationship between requirements and control. In the context of federal information security and privacy policies, the term is generally used to refer to information security and privacy obligations imposed on organizations. The term requirements is used in a broader sense to refer to an impression. The term requirements is used in a broader sense to refer to an expression of the set of stakeholder protection needs for a particular system or organization. So we're going to think about this. There are security and privacy requirements, things we need to do to secure a system. So essentially, we'll determine what types of risks exist for a system based on vulnerabilities and threats, and then we'll determine a control set that counters those threats and risks. These will be the requirements built around security and privacy that we implement into the information system, or the common control set to ensure the system is built with the correct protection and regulatory requirements in place. Stakeholder protection needs and corresponding security and privacy requirements may be derived from many sources, including but not limited to laws, executive orders, directives, regulations, policies, standards, mission and business needs, and risk assessments. It's important when you're building an information system to determine all of the stakeholder protection needs and security and privacy requirements when we're determining the scope of the protection that needs to be applied to the information system to determine the correct controls that will be needed to protect the system and be compliant with regulatory compliance. The term requirements includes both legal and policy requirements, as well as an expression of the broader set of stakeholder protection needs that may be derived from other sources. All of these requirements, when applied to a system, help determine the required characteristics of the system, encompassing security, privacy, and assurance needs. This means we'll put the correct controls in place that meet the needs of the stakeholders and the requirements they levy on an information system. Organizations may choose to divide security and privacy requirements into more granular categories depending on where the requirements are employed in the system development lifecycle and for what purpose. Organizations may use the term capability requirement to describe a capability that the system or organization must provide to satisfy a stakeholder protection need. So we'll build capabilities into the system based on controls that meet a stakeholder's need for protection. Organizations may refer to system requirements that pertain to particular hardware, software, and firmware components of a system as specification requirements, that is, capabilities that implement all or part of a control that may be assessed. Organizations may use the term statement of work requirements to refer to actions that must be performed operationally or during system development. So we have a couple terms here we can use. A statement of work can define those controls or other requirements that must be performed operationally or during system development, and system requirements may pertain to a particular hardware, software, or firmware component of a system, and we can call specification requirements that refer to system requirements that pertain to particular hardware, software, and firmware components of a system. So we can call them specification requirements and statement of work requirements, and have the ability to delineate between the two when we're talking about requirements. So think of specification requirements referring to hardware, software, and firmware components, and statement of work requirements referring to those actions performed operationally or during system development. Controls can be viewed as descriptions of the safeguards and protection capabilities appropriate for achieving particular security and privacy objectives of the organization and reflecting the protection needs of the organizational stakeholders. Controls are selected and implemented by the organization in order to satisfy the system requirements. Stakeholders and other requirements define the system requirements that must be implemented in the system. Controls are those components that help to meet the system requirements. Controls can include technical aspects, administrative aspects, and physical aspects. In some cases, the selection and implementation of a control may necessitate additional specification by the organization in the form of derived requirements or instantiated control parameter values. The derived requirements and control parameter values may be necessary to provide the appropriate level of implementation detail for particular controls within the SDLC. For example, we may have a requirement for a specific password length. That would be a control parameter value. And in other cases, the implementation of one control may only be possible if another control is implemented that wasn't necessarily defined in the requirement statements. Context-dependent requirements, security and privacy requirements, and risks identified by the organization lead to the need for security and privacy controls to respond to the risk. The controls selected by the organization subsequently lead to both specification requirements and statement of work requirements in the system engineering context. And we talked about those earlier. This is an important aspect of how system engineers develop, derive, and decompose requirements as part of the SDLC process. In essence, the system engineer will look at the requirements for a system and determine the controls that can be implemented to meet those requirements of both security and privacy. Thus, organizations manage security and privacy requirements at various levels of granularity and specificity during the life cycle of a system. Controls play an important part in the life cycle by providing high-level statements of protection capability that can be refined and expanded by the organization. So controls are the building blocks. Controls are the things we put in place to meet the requirements of stakeholders and other regulatory sources. In closing, this topic covered the following items: security and privacy requirements, stakeholder protection, requirements, controls, and context-dependent requirements. If any of these seem unfamiliar to you, please go back and watch this video again. We'll see you in the next video.